Guys today have one of the hardest times trying to understand their place in the world. Now bear with me, we'll talk about why, and we'll talk about what we can do about it. Modern men face a false choice. On one side, toxic aggression, on the other side, passive uncertainty. Neither extreme allows for full integrated humanity. Society needs men who combine capability with compassion. This third way of thinking offers strength with purpose, confidence with compassion. Imagine a young guy named Alex. He's scrolling through his phone, bombarded with two conflicting viewpoints. On one side, this is what it means to be a man, hyper-aggressiveness, dominance, that's power. That sensitivity is weakness, and that any form of emotion besides anger is betraying your masculinity. This message is seductive because it's so simple. Be tough, take what you want, never show vulnerability. But what if there's another way? In between being this person who doesn't take other people into account except as opponents, and the other person who is so worried about everybody else that they're paralyzed. That third way is what we are going to talk about today. Now, I figured out this third way not through any sort of revelation or single moment of clarity, but gradually through introspection and a lot of thought and a lot of learning and a lot of growth. My military experience showed me that some of the most exceptional people that I could ever hope to meet integrated strength with capability. And underlying all of that, they had compassion. My medical practice showed me the consequences of being passive and avoidant of discomfort. And this is reflected in our main character, Alex. There was no single moment for him. There was no dramatic epiphany. He's having these same thoughts. He's facing this same journey. He knows something isn't right, but he doesn't know what to do or how to change. He approaches his masculinity like most other things in his life by trial and error because he doesn't have a roadmap or a better way forward. And that roadmap is the foundation for this third way of thinking. Now, we're going to discuss a couple of different things. We're going to talk about a few ways to work from the inside out to become a better, more real, more complete human. And we start with character. So, question number one, what does it mean to be a man of character in today's world? Well, character means choosing the hard right over the easy wrong consistently. We express our values through every action, positive and negative. Modern masculinity has shifted from a character ethic to a personality ethic. And this was wonderfully explained by Stephen Covey in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. What we endeavor to do is to show our genuine character, and that speaks through actions, not announcements. So take Alex. For a guy who's trying to figure out his way in the world without a strong sense of character and values, it's like trekking through the jungle with no map. If character is choosing the hard right over the easy wrong, values are that instruction manual that tells us what to choose. Without the instruction manual and without the map, we wander around lost and confused. So because our first underlying bedrock foundation is character, the first activity that I'm going to suggest is the funeral thought experiment. Now, it's relatively simple, but it can provoke a profound change. So the funeral thought experiment says that we should picture ourselves on the day of our death. The casket is set up, and there's a slideshow about some of the greatest moments of your life. Now, it's important to think to yourself, what will I be remembered for? Not the specific things you did in your life, but the type of person you were. And so that could be something like your daughter coming up and saying that you were the kindest person that she could ever have met. Or your spouse coming up and saying that you were caring even when it was hard. So when we start with that focus of what really matters at the end, we can flesh out how we want to be now. To to lead us to be that person in the years to come. Now, we move on to responsibility. Once we understand the map and the direction we're going, it's important for us to realize as healthy, strong men that we have the responsibility for what's going on in our lives. This obviously doesn't mean that bad things happen only because of what we did. And there's no sense of randomness or unfairness in the universe. That would just be utterly stupid. But what is important to realize is that taking responsibility takes the power and brings it back to us. Even in a situation where we are powerless, or in a situation where things are going the complete opposite way that we want them to, we have a power between choice and reaction. And that's the responsibility at the baseline that we want to attack. So with that in mind, we ask the second question: how does taking responsibility, complete responsibility, transform a man's life? Well, it's a major existentialist principle. And for some of you guys who aren't super into philosophy, existentialism is a philosophical movement. It's still well alive today, but there are some detractors that says that we are responsible for the meaning that we create in our own lives. There is no divine purpose, but that is a freeing and ultimately empowering point of view. Now, the software engineer metaphor. So if you're a software engineer or some sort of computer programmer, and you're responsible for building the code for a big, giant new app that does X, Y, and Z, one day, if you discover that there's a problem in the function of the app, we have to fix it, right? It's pretty hard to fix a problem when you can't acknowledge what the reason was. So this coder, this engineer, may run into difficulties if he refuses to acknowledge that maybe the problem is the code. And yes, it's understandable that not every time will the problem be your fault. But what you can do in that position is to understand that even if you didn't create the problem, maybe it's up to you to try to fix the problem. And the first step comes with acknowledgement. Now, the next part of this that's equally important is radical responsibility is not just responsibility. Its twin in this endeavor is radical self-compassion. It's an understanding that we aren't finished. Just because you take responsibility for an action doesn't mean that you beat yourself up, or you call yourself a loser, or you throw in the towel because it's all done. Though responsibility is a burden, it's the source of power. It's the thing that we can look at and say, I can make a difference in my own life because my choices are what's driving me to that ultimate end goal. It's a source of agency. For our protagonist in this story, Alex, he's begun to identify his values, but he's still trapped in the patterns of blaming circumstances and other people for his problems. Now, he has a spark that says, I need to shift the blame from these other people to what I can control. Don't get me wrong, I love complaining as much as the next person. Complaining for a little bit of blowing off steam is one thing, but complaining to try to make a change is a recipe for disaster. So Alex stops complaining. He starts moving. He starts asking the right questions, and some of those questions are, instead of why did this go wrong, the question is, what can I do about it? One of the ultimate things that we can do as a daily practice is look at what didn't go well today and how did my actions contribute? How did my actions move the needle the wrong way? How did they move the needle the right way? How can I recreate that momentum? Now, being aware of this choice, this radical responsibility, is one step, but I think you'll find in the next step, there's still a lot of room to grow. Now, this next one's my personal favorite. It's called Secure Authenticity. And the question goes like this: how can a man be both authentic and continually improving? It's a relatively easy question to answer, though it can get a little bit confusing. If we are constantly telling ourselves, to thine own self be true, be yourself, do the things you like, is that bad advice in this era and culture of self-help? There's a little bit of nuance here, just like everything else. We think of the third way of masculinity as building a house. It's an old analogy, but it's very helpful. So first, we establish our foundation through character-based living, aligning our actions to our values. Next, we frame the structure with radical responsibility, owning our choices and their consequences. Now, we talk about the third element. This is that secure authenticity. These support the frame and the roof and the structure. This is the anchor that prevents us from being pulled toward every cultural current or passing trend. This is the framework that stops the house from being collapsed. And I think the most important fundamental is this fundamental, and that is that you need to be okay being who you are. That's different than acting as you do now. Everything is your prerogative. It's your choice how you want to do things. Do you want to be an asshole? Knock yourself out. Do you want to be a dickhead? Knock yourself out. But here's the question. If you've identified a goal, if you've identified happiness and a route to get there, then does it make a lot of sense to close yourself off from the possibility that changing certain aspects of yourself could lead you there? On the other hand, too, though, at what point does the sacrifice of giving up the things that you love become too much for somebody's external validation? There are plenty of people when I was growing up loved anime or loved video games or loved card games and Pokemon. And as time went by, as people got a little bit meaner, people start to give these things up that they really do enjoy. And it's the people who have these so-called, acceptable, cool hobbies that really keep going with them. Not a lot of people will demean you for enjoying to work out. But therein lies the problem. At the end of the day, your responsibility, your authenticity, and your meaning comes from inside of you. Sure, there are external influences, there are external forces, but what has to happen is that you live in congruence with the important things to you. And if you're not being authentic, and if you're being insecure, then that will lead to toxicity as opposed to secure masculinity. Principle number 4 is disciplined freedom. That's an oxymoron, I understand, but bear with me for a second. The question that's associated with this principle is, how does discipline create rather than restrict freedom? A couple of things. With our house analogy, discipline is the fence that protects our house. If you want to take a car, discipline is the wheels. It's where the rubber meets the road. And discipline entails often sacrificing immediate gratification for future capability. The initial constraints become ultimately liberating. So finally, Alex has looked at himself in the mirror, he's done his homework, and he's figured out the values that he would like to live by. And he's using this to develop his underlying character. It takes time, but eventually he's following through with the actions that are led by this value and character. Not bashing himself or destroying himself due to his failures, and also not just blowing himself up because of his wins, but understanding that his responsibility is about the outcomes and also the inputs. He's doing things because he wants to, not because of the external approval or the benefits that come along with it, though those things will be there, of course, but he's doing what he likes. And he's using all of this as a structural framework to get to that end state that he would enjoy. And this fourth principle is really where he starts to make those gains. The discipline to do these hard things day in and day out, whether it's exercising, whether it's skipping that extra meal, whether it's being kind to the people who you wouldn't normally, whether it's opening your mind to somebody else's point of view, the discipline to say, it's easy to do the one thing that would push me back, but I'm going to choose the thing that moves me forward. And after he continually does this and builds up those muscles and builds up those patterns, he realizes that he's moved away from the shallow, from the petty, from the mad. He's patient and loving and more understanding. And he's driving through the road of life at his speed, living in congruence with his actions. So what next? How do we put ourselves into Alex's shoes? So what's the first step towards the third way? Well, the first step is understanding. And that's understanding that true, secure masculinity integrates maybe opposing qualities into a coherent whole. So with that in mind, the first step is to identify one core value. This could be patience, it could be understanding. Take responsibility for it. Commit to one daily action that aligns with that value. And remember, this journey isn't about perfection. Act in accordance with our values without the pressure, without the pushing, without the constriction of these external influences. So we've talked a lot today about masculinity, about the two poles of this dichotomy, one being toxicity and one being passive weakness. I think it's pretty self-evident that there is another way. Whether you call it healthy masculinity, whether you call it secure masculinity, whether you call it just being a good person, I leave you with this food for thought. What if being a man doesn't have to mean dominating the people around you? What if it means being mature enough to work with the people around you for a better future? As always, I'm Alexander Turner, and thanks for listening.